Erica Tazel, you play Matilda in the new version of the miniseries Roots, and of course it was previously made as a miniseries in 1977. Had you seen the original before taking part in this one?
I did. It was a few years before we actually got into production, but yes, I did have a reference for it before we started shooting.
Yeah, what did you think about going into this new version, having the previous version in mind?
It wasn't fresh in my mind, which was great because but I did remember Olivia Cole very vividly, and it was nerve-wracking. It was scary. No one, willingly jumps into those types of shoes without some trepidation. But once I read the first version of Night 3, where Matilda is introduced, it became very clear that the writers and researchers had taken great care to retell the story, and that put my heart at ease.
What was the process of getting cast in the role for you?
I always say that they put me through the ringer. Vicki Thomas, who deserves every good thing for casting this major project. I think ultimately she ended up having, I think there were 400 plus roles, and she did it all by herself. And so, it was strenuous because there are obviously the 4 families that you have to cast, and who can be whose mom, and who can age, who can lay down, who could be the wife, who could be the brother. Do they look like cousins, or do they look like husband and wife? And so, there were a lot of rounds. I went in several times and read for several parts, and ultimately I got the call for Matilda, which, I'm glad I landed there. She's an extraordinary woman.
Yeah, what about this role in particular appealed to you?
I think what appealed to me about Matilda is that she endures a very long separation from her husband and manages to change plantations and keep her family together. The family traditions, cultural significance played, a role in the rearing of our children, and she did it by herself. And I call Matilda the, ancestral throwback to the single mother. For many of us who, in our community, whose husbands or boyfriends or fiancés or whatever find themselves incarcerated, very much like George being sent to another country that was his own form of incarceration, and yet someone had to stay home and keep those boys together and keep that family together in hopes that their dad would return. And so I wanted to honor that, and hopefully that's what I did. She was definitely that matriarch, and the one who ultimately, saw freedom, was able to participate in the freedom of the family, emancipation of the family.
And that's one of the compelling themes about the miniseries as a whole, is not just the sense of history and family, but specifically the role women played both in fighting back and keeping their families together. How did you feel about being part of that legacy in this story, along with Belle and Kizzy in the history of this family?
And Binta as well. The women of the first 4 generations at least endure, extraordinary circumstances in terms of separation from their children, separation from their husbands, and to again give voice to the long-suffering wife, the long-suffering mother, which is the one that tends to get left out. Was extraordinary. I mean, the actors who played Binta and Belle and Kizzy obviously are great friends and wonderful actors, and so also to be in that company. And then the legacy of the original mothers, Cicely Tyson, Madge Sinclair, Leslie Uggams, and of course the great Olivia Cole. So to step into those shoes and again to remind audiences and even remind our community of the role that women play and the importance of matriarchy in our community, is very, very, very pleased to be a part of that.
As you mentioned, Olivia Cole played this role in the previous miniseries. Was it important for you to sort of keep that aside so you could find your own way into this character?
I think so. And it's very different. If you saw the original, you see this one, the way the 2 Matildas were written and presented are completely different. So by nature, given what the writers dictated, there were going to be different interpretations. I think Olivia's Matilda ended up being much, much older at the end. We started around the same age, and in the original you see more interaction with as the kids are growing up and as before George leaves to go to England. So by nature, in terms of what our work is, we only can deal with what the writers dictate, and that automatically set us, made the Matildas very different. What they did obviously have in common was, the love of George and the love of the family, and the hope and the dream of seeing us all free together.
Yeah, and it's interesting from the beginning to the end of the storyline. You and Rege-Jean Page as Chicken George, they go through the most the longest span of time, I think, of the major characters. How challenging was it to play a character through decades of emotional and life changes like that?
Well, that was the most fun, I will say, to be able to play 17 to 54, and probably the least fun of it was getting into that makeup at the beginning of the day and certainly getting out of it after a long hours. But Reggae and I would, sit back in the chair and joke with hair and makeup as they slowly took everything off. But the transformation that Chicken George and Matilda make individually, and certainly as a couple and ultimately parents, it's extraordinary. And I thank you for even pointing that out, because it's so nuanced, that relationship. And what Reggae and I had to do was to really create the growth of that love. And certainly while he was away, and imagining what he was doing while he was gone, if he's coming back, if he's alive, and making those creative choices. Do I think he's alive? Do I expect him to come back? Is there a point that I gave up? And I certainly made choices about, no, I didn't remarry. No, I didn't, give up hope that one day that I would see him. And I think that fed, certainly when we reunite, it's all in our eyes. It's all in the way we touch each other. And it's an extraordinary love that Chicken George and Matilda have for one another.
I actually had a chance to talk to Rege-Jean Page last week, and it's interesting about the makeup. He mentioned that he was actually disappointed at the end of the day to take the makeup off, because it's like they were taking away all those years of experience and wisdom. Did it feel
I had mine would start at the end of the day. At the beginning of the day, you come in and there's a clean face, and you're like, how in the world is this going to happen? And then you come up from the chair with your eyes open, and you're like, there's a Matilda. And so the makeup definitely, in the smallest things, age spots, sunspots, Reggae had these great moles that I loved watching them place every day. And so it's those small things, especially when you're not that age, that help you. It's like shoes. It helps you get immediately back into where you left off probably 4 hours the night before.
Now, how did you approach Matilda in those later years, given that there's this long span of about 20 years where we don't see what happens those years that she and George are separated? Did you have to fill in the blanks for yourself to try and how much work did you do on those missing years?
Well, all of that was imagination work. That's actor speak, but what was it like when we moved moved plantations, that moment of, when the 3 children were separated or sold to another plantation, really imagining those circumstances. Obviously that takes place off camera, but all of that has to be present with me, when the cameras roll. So a lot of my work, which is interesting from the other matriarchs in the family, where you see the separation of, you see Belle lose Kizzy, you see Kizzy struggle with Chicken George going to the cockfights all the time and being sent off or riding off with Tom Lee to go on these long trips and in hopes and praying that he would come back. For me, that work was off camera, but had to be very, 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 very specifically created in my imagination, so that, when you see me talk to my son Ashford, the family cat, as we called him, or even seeing George come down that road again with Tom, all of that history and that information that we hear about happen to this family is living and present in me.
Now, the miniseries covers a large span of American slavery, but your character is actually there for the end of slavery, and she, gives this really impactful speech about, mourning for the people who have been lost. She's not even, she doesn't even feel like celebrating because of how much, the cost has been to her and her family. Is that a very emotional scene to shoot?
It was, and I remember that day very, very, very vividly. We were on an actual plantation, and behind the house that you see me coming out of was, this, gorgeous trees, and the wind was blowing, and I always said on the set, the trees talk to us a lot. And at that point in shooting, a lot we had, endured a lot physically and emotionally as real people, as the actors. And it was our last day on this particular location. And I mean, there were, I had very specific relationships with the man who played my father, with the actress who played Kizzy, obviously, as my mother-in-law, and Miss Melizzi, who I, text every day, even now Carol Sutton is her name. And there was, really vivid images of missing them and having this this wonderful thing happen juxtaposed to, but everybody who dreamed about this is not gonna, they're not here. And yes, I'm doing it with my family, but the people that, I sat up around the fire with and hearing growing up, when we're free, when we're free, when we're free. And now I'm ultimately having to do it in a sense by myself. It was a deep, it was emotional. And it felt like being at a party and not knowing anyone at the party, and being at a celebration, and the people who were a part of that or should be a part of that weren't there to, for the toast or whatever. So I remember that day very vividly, and it was one that I was looking forward to shooting for sure, and was excited about shooting, and I'm very pleased with how it turned out. And it is a moment that I get a lot of tweets about for sure, and private messages that moment. So I'm happy to hear that it landed and it resonated, and that I was able to speak those words.
The miniseries aired a couple of weeks ago from May 30th to June 2nd. Did you get a chance to watch the whole thing when it aired?
I watched the first night with a friend of mine, has a 16-year-old daughter, and it was very, very, very interesting watching it with her, and very emotional, lots of questions and conversations sparked, because, she was born into a world where we have an African-American president, and so there's a lot that she hasn't experienced, as a young person, obviously that the children in the miniseries do. And then I watched night 2, and then of course the night Matilda is introduced, I didn't watch it when it aired, and night 3 or 4 I didn't watch it them when they aired. It was maybe a couple of days later that I got to sit down and watch them. And actually last night was the first time I was actually able to go through night 4 undisturbed, no phone calls, no texts, no anything. So yeah, it's, people are also still watching it, so the messages are still coming through, and, it's a slow burn, that one. You got to take that one in doses, depending on where you are emotionally and mentally.
And it's interesting, this sort of multi-generational story. Every single actor in it is one part of a larger whole. So did it make you feel different about the character and different about being part of the whole thing? Just to be able to see the whole project put together, the sum sort of greater than the whole greater than the sum of its parts.
Yeah, well, I always had a very strong sense of how large it was, and that, Matilda, George, the family, that we were a piece of a very large puzzle. And I just focused on that piece, and tried to color that as much as we could, so that once we got to that part of the puzzle, it was as vivid and tangible and emotional and fully realized as possible for the audience. But seeing it all put together, I mean, when I saw the first trailer, I thought, holy cow, what are we a part of? And if that's a 4-minute trailer, what do the full 8 hours look like? So it's still sort of landing and hitting me, how large it was, you know, when you, like you said, put it all together with music and editing and coloring and all of that. You see everybody's work come together. It's a little overwhelming, but in a very good way.
Before Roots, you know, you were best known for playing Rachel Brooks in Justified for 6 seasons, and to say the least, that was a vastly different style of show. How did Roots compare to something like that for you as an actor?
There is no comparison. It's a different story. It's a different character. It's a different genre. It's a different time period. Obviously, Matilda gave me the opportunity to stretch out a little bit emotionally. I had backstory. I had, you know, we knew what my future hopes and dreams were, and even in the, you know, in the scheme of this enormous ensemble, I was individually drawn, and you knew exactly who I was. You know, I can tell you 20 things about her. Rachel was a little bit different. You know, she was, you know, a part of this great U.S. Marshal staff, and her role in that puzzle was what it was in terms of being a support, being, you know, the information getter, the information bringer, and it was a different part of the psyche and the emotional imagination of me as an actor. And it's modern, you know, it's a modern piece versus a period piece, night and day. And so to have those come right after each other is great, because hopefully the conversation will then become about the range that I have as an actor. And the next thing will be very different from Matilda. So I hope to continue to have opportunities like that, where you're like, is that the same person? So yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, of course, Roots and Justified aren't really related, but when you think about the connection you get from Roots and in terms of the history, you know, it's interesting to, you know, in hindsight, to think about Rachel Brooks, you know, a black woman in the American South. You know, she probably had some Matildas and Kizzies and Kunta Kintes in her family tree. Could you almost draw a straight line between those, you know, after the fact?
Well, there's an interesting story, or an interesting piece of Rachel's history, I think, that we discovered maybe in season 4, where Rachel's out with Raylan and we talk about the school that I went to, and we find out that I actually cleaned homes with my mother to help, you know, get funds together to send me to school. And so, you know, certainly Rachel is standing on the shoulders of, you know, her own Kizzy, her own Matilda, her own Belle, who made sacrifices for her to be where she is. And ultimately, you know, she was interim chief. That's unheard of, you know. So even when we were playing that, and previous to getting, I mean, obviously I didn't know about Roots at that time, but Erica had a very keen sense and awareness of how enormous that was. I think Rachel was always aware of how lucky she was to be in the position she was in the office that she was working in, and coming up through the ranks as she was. She was never, you know, she never took that for granted. Maybe took it a little too seriously at times, but as a person just moving through the world, I'm aware of that as well. You know, I'm talking to you on a Monday morning on a computer. Somebody sacrificed for me to be able to have that privilege, and that's exactly what it is. It's a privilege. And so in hindsight, for sure, that connection it's made to my own life. You know, when I think about my own mother and grandmother and great grandparents, how vastly different my life is and how vastly different my opportunities are, but they wouldn't be there if I were not standing on their shoulders.
Well, I want to congratulate you again on Roots, and of course this, you know, incredible range that you showed with Roots and Justified. I do hope the next thing that comes your way is incredibly different, but just as exciting.
Yes, I hope so too. Thank you so much.
Have a good day.